Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into something really fundamental, something that's behind absolutely every single human connection we have. How we communicate. And we're not just talking about, swapping messages. We're diving deep into the core principles, our goal, to give you a really sharp, insightful understanding and do it quickly.
And we've got a bit of an edge here. We've used AI to sift through a huge amount of research, which gives us this structured perspective on something we often just take for granted.
Yeah, like seeing the hidden wiring.
Exactly. It's like getting the blueprint behind our interactions.
So this deep dive is really about unlocking how we actually connect, how we build, that shared understanding between us, and exploring some of the surprising ways communication shapes our reality.
We're aiming for those real aha moments, but without burying you in jargon.
Right. And think about this. Communication isn't new. Dave Missinghetti pointed out it's evolved right alongside societies. From basic signals way back when to the complex language we use now, all driven by our need to connect. It's universal, ancient even.
Absolutely.
So let's get right into it. What are the absolute basic pieces, the building blocks?
Okay, so at the very core, you have a sender, someone who encodes a message, basically, putting their thoughts or ideas into a form that someone else can get.
Like words or gestures.
Exactly. And that message travels through a channel, could be speech, writing, email, whatever, to a receiver.
And the receiver then decodes it, tries to figure out the meaning.
Right. But, and this is key, it's almost never that simple. It's rarely just a straight line from A to B.
Because of noise, right?
Precisely. Noise. And like you hinted at earlier, it's not just, actual background noise. It can be psychological noise, our own biases, our mood, things that color how we interpret the message.
Or semantic noise, like the words themselves being ambiguous.
Yes, exactly. Or even cultural noise, where different backgrounds lead to different interpretations of the same thing. It's a huge factor.
And the receiver isn't just passive.
Not at all. They provide feedback. That's their response, verbal or nonverbal, which tells the sender how the message landed. It makes it a loop, a dynamic process.
And all this happens within a context, right? This specific situation.
Absolutely. The where, the when, the who, it all influences meaning. So the big takeaway here isn't just speak clearly. It's about anticipating and trying to manage all these different kinds of noise, including the noise inside your own head.
Okay. And the ultimate goal usually is this idea of shared understanding.
That's often the aim, yeah, where the receiver gets what the sender intended. And our view of this whole process has evolved.
How so?
Well, initially it was often seen as transactional, just information transfer, like passing a package.
Okay.
But now we tend to see communication as potentially transformational. The act of communicating itself can actually build relationships, change how we see things, even create new knowledge together.
So the receiver is much more active in that view.
Much more active. They're co-creating the meaning, not just receiving it.
Which kind of leads us nicely into symbolic interactionism, doesn't it? That sounds related.
It's very related. It's a really powerful way to look at it. Think about it. Our social world is basically built on symbols we share.
And language is the biggest one.
Language is the main one, yeah. But here's the kicker. The meaning of these symbols isn't set in stone. It's something we constantly negotiate and adjust through our interactions.
Like how the meaning of a word like sick or bad can flip completely depending on the group and the time.
Perfect example. Meaning is socially constructed. It emerges from how we use language together. And symbolic interactionism also talks about thought, our internal conversation.
How does that fit in?
We're constantly interpreting these symbols internally and also, crucially, imagining how others see us or how they might react. It's like playing out scenarios in your head, taking the role of the other.
Ah, okay. So that's how we figure out who we are in relation to others.
Exactly. Our sense of self, our identity, and our shared reality, they're all actively built and rebuilt through this constant process of communication and interpretation. It's not static.
So that's a very social, meaning-driven perspective.
Yeah.
But then there's another angle, right? Information theory. Sounds much more technical.
It is completely different focus. It came out of engineering, really. People like Claude Shannon at Bell Labs, they were focused on the technical problem of transmitting a signal accurately.
Okay, so less about meaning, more about the signal itself.
Precisely. The classic Shannon-Weaver model is very linear. You have an information source, it gets encoded into a signal sent through a channel.
Which might have noise.
Exactly. Noise is central here too, but it's more about interference, corrupting the signal, static, data loss, that kind of thing. Then it's decoded and hopefully reaches the destination intact.
And they had ways to measure this.
Yeah, they introduced the concept of entropy as a measure of uncertainty or randomness in a message. The more ambiguity, the higher the entropy.
So more uncertainty means you need more information to clear it up.
Right. Think of it like a fuzzy picture needing more data points, more pixels to become sharp. The practical point is about clarity. Reducing ambiguity in your message reduces the chance of technical breakdown or misinterpretation.
Fascinating contrast. One theory deeply social, the other almost purely mechanical. Okay, let's zoom out. What about communication in bigger systems, like groups or organizations?
That's where network theory becomes really useful. It helps us map out the connections.
So people are nodes.
Yeah, individuals or groups are nodes, and the communication links between them are edges. We can look at things like how tightly connected people are clustering, how many steps it takes for information to get from one person to another, path length.
And that small world idea, 6 degrees of separation.
Exactly. That comes from network theory, the idea that most people are connected through surprisingly short chains of acquaintances. Understanding these network structures is vital now, especially online. You see how quickly things spread, right? Information, misinformation.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, one more foundational idea, game theory and cheap talk. Communication isn't always honest or purely informational, is it?
Not at all. Game theory looks at strategic interactions. And cheap talk is communication that doesn't cost anything to send and isn't binding. Just words, basically.
You'd think it would matter then.
But it can. Even non-binding talk can influence what people believe about each other's plans or intentions. Think about negotiations.
Like bluffing in poker.
Sort of, yeah. Or just stating your position in a negotiation before making a real offer. It signals something, even if it's not a commitment. It can affect coordination, cooperation, or even deception. So even just talk can have strategic weight.
Okay, so we've got the basic process, the social meaning-making, the technical side, networks, and strategy. These are the building blocks. But you mentioned earlier, our interactions aren't just random. There are rules, right? Social rules.
Absolutely. Communication norms. These are the learned, often totally unwritten rules about what's appropriate, what's expected, how to interact in different situations. They bring order and predictability.
Right. And they're different kinds.
Yeah, a key distinction is between descriptive norms and injunctive norms.
Okay, what's the difference?
Descriptive norms are just what we perceive people typically do. Like, most people stand in line. Injunctive norms are about what we think is approved or disapproved behavior, what you should or shouldn't do.
So the injunctive ones have more social force, like judging people.
Exactly. Violating injunctive norms often leads to social disapproval, maybe even sanctions. Adhering to them brings acceptance. We learn these through socialization, watching others, getting feedback. They're the invisible guardrails of social life. Understanding them is key to fitting in.
But these rules aren't the same everywhere, obviously. Culture plays a huge role.
A massive role. What's polite or normal in one culture can be rude or bizarre in another. This is where frameworks like Hofstede's cultural dimensions come in handy.
Right, things like power distance, individualism versus collectivism.
Exactly. How much inequality is accepted? Is the focus on the individual or the group? How comfortable are people with uncertainty? These dimensions shape communication styles profoundly.
And Hull's high and low context cultures.
Yeah, that's another useful one. Low context cultures, like maybe the US or Germany, rely heavily on explicit, direct verbal communication. The words themselves carry most of the meaning.
Get to the point.
Pretty much. Whereas high context cultures, often found in Asia or Latin America, rely much more on shared understanding, nonverbal cues, the history of the relationship, the context. A lot is left unsaid because it's assumed to be understood.
So you can see how misunderstandings could happen easily between those styles.
Oh, easily. The crucial thing is just recognizing that your normal isn't universal. Styles are deeply cultural.
And it's not just the words either. Nonverbal stuff varies too, right? Like personal space.
Absolutely. Proxemics, how we use space, how close you stand when talking. That varies hugely. What feels comfortable in one place feels invasive in another.
And time. Chronemics.
Yeah, how cultures perceive and use time. Monochronic cultures tend to value punctuality, doing one thing at a time, sticking to schedules. Think Germany, Switzerland. Polychronic cultures have a more fluid approach. Relationships might trump schedules. Juggling multiple things is common. Think parts of Latin America or the Middle East.
So being late means different things.
Very different things. Even silence can mean different things. Respect in one culture, awkwardness in another. These nonverbals are fundamental but culturally coded.
Okay, and then there's the language itself. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Does the language we speak actually shape how we think?
That's the idea. Linguistic relativity. The structure of your language influences how you perceive and categorize the world.
So if a language has lots of words for snow, speakers of that language might actually perceive snow differently.
That's the classic example, yeah. The strong version, linguistic determinism, that language completely dictates thought, is mostly rejected now. But the weaker version, relativity, that language influences or provides frameworks for thought, is widely accepted. Language gives us the conceptual boxes we use to sort our experiences.
So norms, culture, language, they create this fabric. How does communication then tie into the very structure of society, like laws and governance?
Well, think about social contract theory, the idea that society is based on some kind of agreement. We give up some freedoms for collective security and order.
Okay.
Communication is absolutely essential for that. How do we establish those agreements? Through debate, discussion, or writing laws, how do we maintain them? Through education, media, public discourse, how do we challenge or change them? Through protest, advocacy, political communication. It's the tool we use to build, negotiate, and repair the social contract.
And communication isn't neutral in this, is it? It can reinforce existing power structures.
Definitely. Those cultural dimensions we mentioned, like power distance, they often show up in communication styles that maintain hierarchies, who gets to speak, whose voice carries weight.
Access to channels matters too. Media ownership, platform control.
Absolutely. And language itself can be used to assert dominance or exclude people. Even the communication norms themselves can sometimes privilege the ways dominant groups communicate. So yeah, communication doesn't just reflect social structures, it actively helps create and maintain them, including inequalities.
Even something seemingly simple like politeness turns out to be complex and culturally loaded. You mentioned politeness theory.
Right. Politeness is basically about managing face, our public image, and respecting others. The theory talks about positive face, wanting to be liked, approved of, and negative face, wanting autonomy, not to be imposed upon. How we balance those needs in conversation is culturally specific. Early research tried to find universal politeness strategies, but it became clear that context, culture, and the specific relationship are hugely important. What's polite in one situation isn't in another. It shows how even these really basic social skills are dynamic and learned within a culture.
So society is built on these layers of norms, culture, power, all mediated by communication. Let's shift focus now to the individual. How do our own minds, our psychology, our development play into how we communicate?
Okay, yeah, moving to the interpersonal level, there are some really key theories here. Take Grecian maxims.
Those are the unspoken rules of cooperative conversation.
Exactly. The idea is we generally assume people are trying to be cooperative, so we expect them to be informative enough, quantity, truthful, quality, relevant, relation, and clear manner.
But we break them all the time, right, for effect.
We do, and that's the interesting part. When someone obviously flouts a maxim, we usually assume they're still being cooperative at a deeper level, and we look for the implied, meaning the implicature.
Like sarcasm, saying, great weather, when it's pouring. You're flouting quality.
Perfect example. You know they don't mean it literally, so you figure out the implied sarcastic meaning.
Okay, what else governs our interactions?
There's social penetration theory, often called the onion theory. It suggests relationships develop as self-disclosure increases.
Peeling back the layers.
Exactly. You start with superficial stuff, breadth, and gradually share more intimate information, depth, as trust builds.
Makes sense. And uncertainty reduction theory. That sounds relevant for meeting new people.
It is. It argues that when we first meet someone, we're driven by a need to reduce uncertainty about them. We want to be able to predict their behavior.
So we try to find out more.
Right. Through passive strategies, observing active strategies, asking others, or interactive strategies, talking directly to them, the goal is to make the person less of an unknown quantity.
And we also adjust how we talk, depending on who we're with.
Yeah, that's communication accommodation theory. We often subconsciously shift our speech style, accent, speed, vocabulary to match the person we're talking to. That's convergence.
To build rapport, show solidarity.
Exactly. Or sometimes we might do the opposite, diverge. Emphasize the differences in our speech to signal social distance or group identity.
Interesting. And expectancy violations theory. What happens when someone doesn't communicate as we expect?
That theory looks at our reactions to unexpected communication behavior. Our reaction depends on two things. First, the violation valence, did we perceive the unexpected behavior as positive or negative?
Okay.
And second, the communicator reward valence, basically, how much we like or value the person doing the unexpected thing. A positive violation from someone we like is great. A negative violation from someone we dislike is really bad.
So breaking a norm isn't always bad. It depends.
It totally depends on the violation itself and who's doing it.
Beyond these sort of interactional strategies, what about our internal biases and emotions? They must mess with communication too.
Oh, hugely. The fundamental attribution error is a big one. We tend to overestimate the role of someone's personality or character in their behavior. He's late because he's lazy, and underestimate situational factors. He's late because traffic was awful.
And we do the opposite for ourselves.
Often, yes.
Right.
This bias really shapes how we interpret others' communication and intentions, often negatively.
And Bayon's basic assumptions in groups. What are those?
Wilfred Bion observed that groups often operate under unconscious, shared emotional assumptions that can distort their work and communication. Things like dependency, acting helpless, looking to the leader for all answers, fight-flight, seeing threats everywhere, either attacking or avoiding issues, or pairing, focusing on pairs within the group, hoping they'll produce a solution.
So these are like hidden emotional currents pulling the group off track.
Exactly. They can really derail rational discussion and problem solving.
What other internal factors create barriers?
Well, there's belief perseverance, clinging to our beliefs even when there's evidence against them. And confirmation bias, actively seeking out information that confirms what we already think and ignoring contradictory evidence.
We all do that to some extent.
We do. And psychological defense mechanisms, denial, projection, rationalization, kick in when we feel threatened by communication that challenges our views or self-image. Our hidden, maybe unconscious beliefs resist change.
And if our group identity feels attacked?
That triggers social identity threat. If we feel our group is being devalued, we can become very defensive, maybe more biased against outsiders, and communicate in ways that protect the group's image, even if it's not entirely accurate. Our brain is wired to protect our sense of self and belonging.
Okay, so our minds are full of potential pitfalls.
Mm-hmm.
What about how these skills develop? How do we learn to navigate this complexity?
A massive step is developing theory of mind, usually around age 4.
That's understanding that other people have their own minds, beliefs, desires, intentions, different from mine.
Precisely. Before that, kids often assume everyone knows what they know. Theory of mind is foundational for understanding perspective, intention, deception, irony, sarcasm, all the subtleties of pragmatic language.
And how do we develop it?
Social interaction is key, especially collaborative communication, working things out with others, seeing different viewpoints.
And what about gender? Are there real differences in how men and women communicate, or is that mostly stereotypes?
Well, it's debated. There are theories, like Deborah Tannen's work suggesting women often focus more on rapport talk, building connection, while men might focus more on report talk, conveying information, status. Robin Lakoff also identified features sometimes associated with women's language, like hedges or tag questions, potentially reflecting less social power.
But these are controversial.
They are. Critics argue they can reinforce stereotypes, overlook variation within genders, and ignore the role of context and power dynamics rather than just gender itself. But they do highlight how social expectations linked to gender can influence communication styles we learn or adopt.
And beneath all the learning and psychology, there's biology too.
Oh, yes. The social brain hypothesis proposes our large primate brains evolved partly to manage complex social relationships, and communication, especially language, was crucial for that. For social bonding, coordination.
And specific brain systems.
Sure, hormones like oxytocin play a role in trust, bonding, and social recognition. The mirror neuron system is fascinating neurons that fire both when we perform an action and when we see someone else perform it.
That sounds like it's involved in empathy. Understanding others.
Exactly. It's thought to be crucial for understanding intentions, empathy, imitation learning, and potentially even the evolution of language itself.
And genes. Is communication ability inherited?
Research in behavioral genetics suggests there is a heritable component to conversational skills and language development, yes. But like most complex traits, it's a mix of genes and environment. Biology provides the foundation, but learning and experience build the structure.
Wow, okay. So it's this incredible mix of biology, psychology, development, culture, social rules, all feeding into how we communicate. Now let's talk impact. How do these fundamentals actually show up in different parts of our lives?
Their influence is everywhere. Think about arguments and relationships. Skills like active listening, expressing needs clearly, managing conflict instructively, they're all built on these fundamentals. Family communication patterns theory, for instance, looks at how conversation orientation, openness, and conformity orientation, demanding agreement, in families shape relationships and individual outcomes.
Right. And
Health. Hugely important. Patient-centered communication doctors, really listening, explaining clearly, showing empathy leads to better health outcomes, better adherence to treatment. Designing effective public health campaigns depends entirely on understanding how to communicate risk, benefits, and behaviors clearly and persuasively.
environmental issues, too.
Definitely. Raising awareness about climate change, promoting pro-environmental behaviors, building consensus for policy changes, it all hinges on effective communication strategies. Framing the message matters enormously.
What about education? Seems obvious, but maybe unpack it.
Well, teacher clarity is a huge factor in student learning, but it's more than just being clear. It's also about active listening to students, fostering interaction, using nonverbal cues effectively, setting clear expectations, norms, asking good questions that promote thinking, and adapting communication for different students. It's fundamental to the whole process.
And history. How does communication shape our understanding of the past?
History isn't just facts, it's narratives constructed through communication. How societies remember their past cultural memory is actively shaped through stories, monuments, rituals, media. And these narratives are often contested. Whose story gets told? Whose voice is silenced? Historiography itself is an act of communication, interpreting and presenting the past.
Even something like comedy.
Yeah. Humor often relies on violating expectations, like Grecian maxims, playing with shared knowledge, or creating incongruity, all communication principles. Theories of humor often point to things like superiority, laughing at others, relief, releasing tension, or benign violations. And art interpretation is fundamentally communicative, a dialogue between the viewer, the artwork, and the cultural context, trying to make meaning. Reader response criticism focuses explicitly on this interactive meaning-making.
Okay, shifting to a much darker area. War.
Communication plays a really complex and often tragic role. It can be a cause-think propaganda that dehumanizes the enemy, nationalist rhetoric, failures in diplomacy. It's used in the conduct of war psychological operations, spreading fear or misinformation. But crucially, it's also essential for resolution diplomacy, negotiation, peace-building, countering extremist narratives.
And in today's world, media is inseparable from communication's impact.
Absolutely. Media doesn't just report reality, it frames it, influencing what we think is important and how we think about it. Media bias, propaganda models, the way media can reinforce or challenge social structures and cultural norms, it's a massive force shaping our shared understanding or lack thereof.
Politics and economics, too.
Completely intertwined. Political discourse aims to persuade, mobilize, define identities, create polarization. Economic narratives, stories about growth, recession, risk, opportunity significantly shape market behavior, investor confidence, consumer spending. Communication literally moves markets and elections.
Even something as profound as death.
Yes. How we deal with death is deeply communicative. Funeral rituals provide shared meaning and structure grief. We tell stories to make sense of loss and preserve memory. Interpersonal communication is vital for expressing and receiving support during bereavement. We talk about legacies.
And the flip side, misleading information, disinformation.
A huge problem, obviously. These campaigns deliberately exploit communication fundamentals. They use emotional appeals, target cognitive biases like confirmation bias, create echo chambers to limit exposure to different views, and leverage social network dynamics to spread rapidly. They work by undermining trust and manipulating perception. Understanding the fundamentals helps us see how they work.
Even just the rhythm of daily life.
Yeah.
Day versus night.
It's subtle, but yes. Communication often shifts, maybe more formal, task-oriented during the workday, shifting to more relational, relaxed communication in the evening. The context changes, and so does the communication style.
This really covers, well, everything. Going back to the AI analysis we started with, what can AI tell us about all this, and what are its limits?
AI is incredibly powerful at analyzing patterns in language, mapping communication networks, detecting anomalies or shifts in large data sets. It can process far more text or speech than any human could.
So it's good at the what and how much.
Kind of, yeah. It can spot correlations, identify stylistic features, track the spread of information. But it fundamentally lacks consciousness, lived experience, genuine empathy, deep cultural understanding, and intentionality.
So it doesn't understand meaning in the human sense.
Not really.
Okay.
It processes symbols based on patterns it's learned, but it doesn't grasp the rich, contextual, felt meaning behind them. It can't truly understand irony or comfort someone grieving or grasp the nuances of a high-context cultural interaction. It can see the mechanics, but not the human heart of communication.
Which brings up ethics. If these fundamentals shape everything, how do we distinguish proper use from improper or even dangerous use?
That's a critical question. Harmful speech like hate speech, incitement to violence, harassment clearly uses communication fundamentals in destructive ways. It aims to dehumanize, exclude, and harm. Defining the line between free expression and harmful speech is a constant societal challenge. There are ethical guidelines, often focusing on things like truthfulness, respect, fairness, accountability, minimizing harm.
But people disagree fundamentally on these things, don't they? That seems to be the root of many conflicts.
Absolutely. Controversies around communication fundamentals in politics, economics, relationship, society, they often boil down to clashes in core values, beliefs about how the world works, or different ideological frameworks. What one group sees as essential truth, another sees as harmful ideology.
What triggers some of the more fundamental behaviors, like aggression or gossip?
Theories suggest aggression can be triggered by perceived threats, norm violations, dehumanization of others, linking back to Bayon's fight assumption. Gossip, while often seen negatively, can also function, some argue, for social bonding, information sharing, and enforcing group norms. Predictions, trying to figure things out, links back to that uncertainty reduction drive we talked about.
And philosophers have wrestled with the very idea of meaning for centuries, right?
Oh, definitely. The philosophy of language explores all sorts of theories about what meaning is. Is it the idea in the speaker's head? Is it tied to truth conditions? Is meaning simply how words are used in a language game? There's no single answer, which highlights just how complex achieving that shared understanding really is.
Logic and argumentation play a role, too.
Yes, in evaluating the structure and validity of communicative claims. Even Grice's maxims are relevant to argumentation. The assumption of cooperation and rationality underlies how we evaluate arguments.
And moral reasoning, how does that connect?
Our stage of moral development, like Kohlberg's stages, from avoiding punishment to universal principles, or Gilligan's ethics of care, emphasizing relationships and responsibility, influences how we communicate about ethical issues, how we justify our positions, and how we engage in dialogue about right and wrong.
So given all this complexity and disagreement, how can we even evaluate if communication is correct or good? Is there a right way?
Epistemology, the theory of knowledge, grapples with this. Is knowledge based on foundational beliefs, foundationalism, on how well beliefs fit together, coherentism, on reliable processes, reliabilism? Is it reason, rationalism, or experience, empiricism? There's no single agreed-upon method for definitively saying communication is correct. Often, we fall back on pragmatic assessment. Does it achieve the intended goal? Is it ethical? Does it foster understanding?
So less about absolute correctness, more about effectiveness and ethics in context. Okay, how can we improve things, mitigate the problems?
Several key areas. Enhancing intercultural communication competence is huge. That involves developing empathy, cultural self-awareness, paying attention to nonverbal cues, using clear language, active listening, seeking feedback, showing respect, and ideally, getting training or immersing oneself in other cultures.
What about tackling misinformation?
That requires a multi-pronged approach. Debunking false claims after they spread, but also pre-bunking, inoculating people against manipulation techniques beforehand. Promoting media literacy skills is vital. Supporting fact-checking initiatives. Maybe even algorithmic solutions on platforms, though that's tricky. Appealing to people's existing values can sometimes be more effective than just hitting them with facts. Warning labels might help too.
And dealing with conflict more constructively.
Key techniques involve encouraging open dialogue where everyone feels heard, practicing active listening without interrupting, deliberately seeking out diverse perspectives, focusing on shared goals rather than just positions, brainstorming solutions together, taking shared responsibility, and adopting a collaborative rather than competitive style.
Looking ahead from this AI-informed perspective, what might the future of human interaction look like?
Well, AI could potentially enhance communication education by providing personalized feedback. Maybe help mediate conflicts by analyzing language patterns objectively, possibly foster more cohesive societies by identifying areas of misunderstanding or bridging communication gaps. But it also raises huge ethical questions about AI development and its role. And critically, we need to ensure we preserve and value the uniquely human skills empathy, nuance, genuine connection that AI can't replicate.
This has been incredibly insightful. It really underscores how these communication fundamentals aren't just academic concepts, they are the absolute bedrock of our social world.
They really are. From the simplest chat to the most complex global issues, it all comes back to these core principles.
And they're not static, right? They're dynamic, culturally shaped, and their impact ripples through every single part of our lives.
Absolutely. And the ethical dimension, using this powerful tool constructively, is something we constantly need to grapple with.
So, a final thought for everyone listening. How might a deeper awareness of these fundamentals change your interactions?
Yeah.
Your understanding of the news, your relationships, how you navigate disagreements.
Yeah, maybe think about which fundamental stood out to you. Is there one aspect you want to explore more or perhaps work on in your own communication? That awareness itself is a powerful first step.
This is DigitView.